everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on supporting military service members in their higher education journey. We're going to be exploring in today's conversation how to effectively recognize learning. And in a lot of ways that is centered around credit for prior learning, but there are lots of other ways to acknowledge what people know and have learned over the course of their careers. And there are some unique opportunities and challenges that are faced by active duty, reserve, and retired personnel pursuing degrees. So today we're joined by this really exceptional panel with a combined experience, including over 30 years in the Coast Guard, 20 years in the Navy, 12 years in the Army, 50 plus years as military spouses, and more than 80 years in higher education across numerous institutions. So I can't think of a better group of people to bring together to have this really important conversation. Today, we really want to dig into the essential markers for building programs that truly support military success in the workforce. And these insights are coming from experts who have lived experience from multiple different perspectives. So let's get started here. Everyone's bio is in the webinar overview, so I won't ask you to go through and dig into your bio per se, but I think it is really important that people understand the unique perspective and the kind of human element that you all bring into this really important work of military and higher ed and that intersectionality. So, Kelvin, since you're on my top left, I'll start with you. And we just, if you can just we'll do a quick round robin of where everybody's coming from.
Thanks, Jesse. Really glad to be here and great to be with this great panel. I'm Kelvin Gumbs. I'm Executive Director at Purdue University, focused on military educational and strategic partnerships. Prior to that, I was in the Navy for 22 years and really excited to be at this conversation because, again, I'm approaching this dialogue and really my work through my own experiences as an adult learner my entire life. All of my degrees were earned while on active duty or while working post-military. So really excited to be here with all of you.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm the Coastie in the group, graduate of the academy, and then 26 years between active duty and reserve, split almost evenly. I was a military spouse for much of that and a military mom post all of that. So it's kind of all around me. I also, like Kelvin, had a few small kids roaming all over the country trying to get a master's degree and a doctoral degree, and I managed to do it. And it took me where I really wanted to go out of the military and into the education world. Working at a community college then for many, many years, and now at Walden University. And I'll tell you what interests me the most is in all that time, I'm getting all these degrees and taking advantage of all these programs. And I saw so many people, many of whom entered the military for the education benefits, who just never did it. And I really feel like we have to up our game if we're going to be true to that promise we give our military members when they join, in making it accessible and in giving it so much value that they almost feel like they're missing out if they don't do it, when their time has come to leave the military and move on, or even before that. So thanks. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Such a great point already.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Runco Bevilacqua. I currently work as the Vice President of Innovation Strategy and Delivery at SOLID, or Solutions for Information Design. So I'm not coming from the higher education background per se in my current role, but have previously worked for nonprofits focused on higher education and post-secondary learning, as well as worked on college campuses specifically with the military connected population. So this is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart because I've watched individuals go through the transition, come into the academic arena, and not be able to get the credit that they deserve for what they know and can do. Lots of examples, if there's time in the conversation today to share concretely of what that looked like. I'm also a former military spouse, so I did watch my former husband go through the transition as well as an infantryman, which is a majority of service members kind of go into that role when they come into the military. It's a very large group. But there's not a whole lot of opportunity that directly connects without really understanding what their skills are and the nuance of what their roles were outside of just and I say just very loosely, for lack of a better word, serving as an infantryman, right? So really excited. I'm going to come at it more from like the skills-based perspective today, like more broadly recognition of learning, but I'll definitely throw my 2 cents in as necessary around credit for prior learning as well. So thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allegra Fowler. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Prior Learning Recognition at Purdue University Global, and most schools don't have one of those, but our center is really focused on making sure that learners of all sorts who are engaging in their higher education journey have the support and the tools that they need to get recognition for what they've already learned. And obviously that is very, very specifically connected to our military learners who are making that bridge into higher education either well or after they have served the country. So really excited to participate on the panel today and offer some perspective and share some great conversation.
So Allegra, let's just dig into that a little bit more. You have with a very specific title in your center. You know, what I hear the most from people is that they don't even know that this is an option. And when you talk to them about it, they're like, oh, that would be great if higher ed offered them it. Do you kind of surpass that entire disbelief and wonderment phase because they're like, wow, there's a dedicated space and the semantics are already covered? Or how is that working for you? And how does that kind of dig into the whole access and completion element of this?
Yeah, well, there's always work to be done, right? So simply having the center, that's a step on our journey as an institution. But what I think it really reflects, and it's great to see more progress in higher education toward this end, which is we have to be really intentional about the solutions that we're designing for military students, military learners more generally. It's not just going to happen on its own. We have to think about what we are going to actually do to support these learners. And so, one of the things we focus on at Purdue Global is building up our tools. What can we do for these service members as they pursue their education, and making sure that those tools are not just, available to military learners, but are being, telegraphed specifically to them. Hey, you should be doing this. Here's something that would benefit you, because it really isn't just if you build it, they will come. Somebody has to be telling these learners that these solutions are there. And so we try to build those intentional solutions, and we try to build communication networks that will alert the learners to those opportunities. And the other thing we're really trying to do at Purdue Global, and I think there are a lot of institutions who want to do this, right? They have their hearts in the right place about making credit opportunities for military learners. But we're focused a little bit too much, I think, on making credit available in a very abstract way, where, yeah, you could get credit for this requirement or this course. But what we have to shift our focus towards as higher education more generally is, what are we going to create that's going to be useful to that service member? Not just abstract, not just, bits and pieces here and there, but how are we going to bring it all together to make a solution for that service member that's actually going to help them achieve their goals? And so that's really how we approach this work. And, we do it through a combination of reactive and proactive research projects. But we're really focused on making sure that the work we're doing is not happening on accident. We're doing it on purpose, and we're being comprehensive to try to strive to get something that's going to help a service member achieve those goals.
And so how is your approach at Walden a little bit different than or similar to what Purdue Global is doing?
Yeah, well, I think fundamentally our aims are the same. But I think we're going about them a little bit differently. And we do not have an office dedicated to military specifically, but we do have an office called our Center for Degree Acceleration, which by its title has a pretty clear goal and broad applicability. And I'll tell you what resonated for me in what you were saying there, Allegra, is higher ed, like many organizations, I imagine, but most of my experiences in higher ed focuses so much on inputs and so little on outcomes. Like, check a bunch of boxes. We have this, and this, and this, and this, and nobody uses it. And I remember one of my first days as provost, someone quite proudly presented me their data on how awesome their thing was. and it was satisfaction data. And I was like, great. How many people of our population use it? And the answer was 4%. And I was like, well, then that means 96% are unhappy in my mind, because probably everybody needs it, right? And so I do think that focusing on outcomes has shifted our dialogue. And the outcomes are job transition or meet your job goals, whatever they are. It might be a fresh start, might be transition, it might be, something else. But then backing that up to the admissions process, our goal is, if you're bringing in credit, for example, you get every single credit awarded. And if you don't, that decision has to be escalated to somebody who has to approve it. Like, the assumption is that every one of your credits will transfer, not the let's see how much we'll give you approach, which most people take, right? And on the side of military, along with our population at Walden, which is mostly working adults, and in my community college, it was like this too, a lot of working adults, is if you've been out in the workforce for X number of years, we're working towards establishing a target of how many credits you'll get because you have worked. And those skills have to transfer to something. It's our job to figure out what. And if those targets don't get met, then we're going to have a conversation too, because the outcome is treating you with respect and the things that you've done with respect, not just in words, but in time and money, which is what credits are, right? Time and money. And so trying to be creative in our approaches to that so that we get that outcome that we desire, and making sure everyone has that mindset, I think, at the outset.
So, like you say it so eloquently, that's really, really hard to do. It's really hard to do.
Yes.
And I think, Lauren, you've been working on trying to help disaggregate this kind of chaos that happens in the system through some of the work that you've been doing too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as the world and economy and workforce development, all of that continues to shift, right? Everything is changing very rapidly. I think every day we watch the news and something is exciting that's happening. There's scary things out there that are happening. Higher education is being looked at through a new lens. And I think credit for prior learning will continue to evolve as higher education evolves, as we see more and more adult learners and non-traditional age students kind of going in other directions. Maybe they're waiting to go to school, they're taking up trades or different types of non-degree credential training. I think it's been really interesting to kind of sit at the crux of all of this and see, we have a fantastic subject matter expert at Solid, Dr. Amy Mores, who's very well known in the CPL space, right? And so we have really fun conversations around how do we preserve CPL while also understanding where we need to make change, where we need to push on the way that things have always been done, right? And that's where kind of the skills first approach really started to come out. And I think over the last 5 years, but more explicitly the last year or two, you're hearing more around skills-based hiring, skills-first approaches. How can we make sure that learning outcomes in higher education are documented with, yes, the Carnegie Hour, but also competencies, and maybe there's even skill identification as a part of those competencies, so that we can start to have better ways of communicating with employers and the individual themselves what they know and can do. So I think it's been really sitting in this unique space of being able to watch it all while also having some influence in helping to shape the different direction it goes specific to military learners has, it's both a blessing and a curse, I think, because we tend to a lot of times make decisions or make movement that isn't always cognizant of the military learner. So we're doing it in general for the adult population, but there's a lot of nuance with military learning and training that's documented in different ways. It's really documented, it's well documented, but it's not using language that's easily understood by the civilian population. And so there in of itself, it causes issues. So I think it's been, again, it's a true honor to sit in this room with these experts and have these conversations that we've had. Allegra, we've had many conversations around this too, of how do we push on it, but also maintain the integrity that is there and the work that has gone into getting credit for prior learning where it sits today. And I love what Sue shared about coming at it from a strengths base versus deficit. Like you come here, you bring skills, you bring learning. We want to recognize that. We're not going to make you fight for that or treat it as we're awarding you something. You're not giving them something they didn't already deserve. And I think that's just I love that mindset. And it's one that I think more institutions really need to start thinking about, because they do bring so much to the table. And so, yeah, anyway, I loved Sue's perspective and Allegra's perspective. I think it really does a nice job of talking about like exemplars in the space. Like, you all are exemplars, and we have to help others understand how to become an exemplar, and give them the skills to do that. So hopefully I answered that question.
There's so many ways that we can take this conversation. And there's this element that I want to push on just for a second, which is, when I first realized that ACE had the military guide and that they were already there, I was like, oh, it's already figured out. Like, people can just go to this guide and they're going to get, I'm a whatever it is, and I'm going to get this many credits. That is not what's happening. Kelvin, you always say, let's not waste people's time. I think I've heard you say it like maybe 25 times in the short time that we've known each other. Like, how do you square that?
It's reality. Let's not waste people's time. And I want to take a step back, and then I want to address that, because everything that's been said, frankly, it's like podcast over. It's been said, right? But the reality is like, this work is about this continual process and this work that is about increasing accessibility and opportunity to learners, right? And to Sue's point, time and money. It's just simply put, it's time and money. And working adults, as we all know, come with like vast experience and life learned, right? Especially our military affiliated learners, right? So now, to Allegra's point about being intentional about this work and how we serve them is really the crux of the issue here is, and recognizing that every university is going to do it a little different. Let's not waste people's time, right? Let's not make, our military affiliated learners do something that we know they've already done. So I wanted to say that just to address kind of how we kick things off, because it's really, really important. To your point, I think that the ACE piece, and obviously thankful that entities like ACE are out there doing this work and they're kind of making it relatively easy. But the reality of the matter is ACE isn't covering everything, right? So when we get a learner that maybe has just come out of the latest and greatest MOS or rating training, and ACE has not established credit, we have to roll up our sleeves yet again and understand that there's new training out there. It's evolving all the time. Maybe it hasn't, not to mention the 5 years or however many years it is that ACE reviews content. We have to be very intentional and lean into this, and we have to be agile and adaptive to what working professionals, military affiliated learners are learning. So I think it goes to the point again about being intentional and recognizing that a learner today may call Walden or may call Purdue or may call Purdue Global saying, hey, I've gotten this latest and greatest training on autonomy. How do we now take a step back, recognize that training hasn't or credit hasn't been established for the training, and pull together faculty, teams, and experts to get to that work. So it's not easy, it's continuous, and it really, really calls for incredible levels of energy in how we do this. And by the way, I'll just say that how Purdue Global leans into this work with the Center for Prior Learning Recognition is a little different than how Purdue does this work, because we're serving different people. But I think for us, just kind of having that land grant mindset about accessibility and opportunity, it makes this work mission focused, so to speak. So that was a little bit of a ramble there, but I think we have to be very agile and adaptable to how training is changing and ensuring that we're not just waiting for ACE or some other body to say, all right, the training exists, now you can serve the learner.
Yeah, and I'd like to piggyback on that, because what I would say is I think that ACE is one of the strongest tools that we have in our toolbox. but we have to have other tools, right? Because what ACE is going to capture is the standardized learning that every service member in that course or experience has obtained. But what about everything else, right? So what about the personal and lifelong learning that an individual, maybe you sat next to each other in class, but these people are doing different things. And so I think there's got to be more emphasis on that toolbox itself. Do we have the tools so that individuals have a mechanism by which to gain access to that credit? And yeah, we're big fans of those ACE recommendations because they let us hit the ground running. But then maybe there's an experiential learning portfolio for all the other stuff that service member did while they were who knows where, doing who knows what with their time. I think that's really, really important for us to emphasize, is that comprehensive support of all of the learning that an individual might obtain, either through their military career or otherwise. And another point that I would make is, and I think this connects to some of what Sue was describing, is, transparency is really important in this, because these are learners who really need to know what we are up to on the higher education side. We're not always the best, especially I work in records administration. We're kind of a back end shop, but the work we do is so relevant to the learners that we touch. So we try to create a level of transparency so that service members have that upfront guidance to know what is the credit that I'm going to get. And I think Kelvin and Sue both said, time and money, right? If we can put credits on the table, and Lauren said, we're not giving it to them, they earned it. If we can put time and money back in the pockets of these learners, we need to be able to communicate that up front. We need to meet or as soon as possible, so that these individuals can engage in responsible and totally appropriate life planning for how they are going to get from A to B, and maybe a little pit stop on the way, because life is complicated. But the more information I think higher education can offer service members up front to create transparency to that individual learner, here's how it's going to look for you, I think that creates an exponential amount of value as they make their life plans around the opportunities that they're considering. So I think in terms of students, that's really important. But I think that same level of transparency turned to communities like this, our peers and our colleagues, and the best practices. And I've already learned so much from Sue just in a couple conversations, things I hadn't thought about. And that's what I hope institutions and folks like Lauren can bring to each other and say, hey, well, did you ever think about it this way? Because if we can be transparent in our professional community, we can start gaining visibility into best practices that might help us do better. And let's be honest, there's a lot of learners out there. There's a lot of military learners out there. If we all just did our best and supported them, we can take a great opportunity to learn from each other, and doing that a little bit better at our home institutions. So Jesse, I think creating webinars like this, creating spaces for good ideas to be shared freely, is really important for the communities that we are a part of.
Yeah, I'm gonna tack on to that, Allegra. Really important about the transparency topic there. I mean, I do think everything's so mysterious, right? Like, go behind the curtain, talk to the wizard, and credit will appear. Give me a break. Anyway, I'm gonna try to not wax too philosophical here about this, but I do think some of this is like just totally broader also. And it goes to this, Lauren, you mentioned, the workforce changes, education is changing, but learning is changing, right? And gosh, we didn't figure out how learning changed with the internet pretty clearly. We haven't really grabbed all that. But I say we never even figured out how learning changed with the printing press. And it goes back that far. Like, if you think about like the origins of the system that we're using, it wasn't made for everybody. It was made for people who didn't work. It was made for people who all they did was think. And you pulled it outside over here, and these elite people would get books, like, ooh. And like now, knowledge is everywhere. It's for everyone. And we haven't adjusted our thinking at all. So all this skills-based matching up with ACE, appreciate it, totally. but it is built on what I think is a false paradigm that some group of people at some institution decided what somebody in a profession needed to know. And then put 5 of them in a room and see if they agree, right? Give me a break. They never do. So we act like there's this big sacrosanct thing that everybody has to learn this. And accreditors, they just made it worse because they make you do all this learning outcomes stuff around things you made up in the first place. So we made this thing up, and now we're going to create a whole system to make sure everybody does this thing we made up. It's crazy town. And if we could go more to the idea that what we want is people who can think and people who can be creative and people who can get along with others and take all that stuff, which military people are great at, and then combine it with some skills on how to access knowledge in the future, we blow the whole thing up. And we realize how disconnected it is from reality because we haven't tried to make it match reality since the printing press.
And Sue, I love everything you said because I completely agree. Learning has changed tremendously. I think the other piece of what you said that I think everyone's really trying to push on, or a lot of organizations are trying to push on, is how do we get academia and workforce to work together, right? Because when academia is out there saying, well, we're going to build curriculum around this, and this is what you should know, and I did this job for however many years, and this is right. Then you've got the practitioner perspective and you've got the academic perspective, but what about what the workforce currently needs, right? And so if you leave the employers out of the conversation, you might be teaching the right ideology, you might be teaching the right theory, even some elements of practice, right? But if you can't then send them off to get a job where they can be successful in that role and understand how to apply everything they've learned, then we've done a disservice, right? And so I think that's a little bit where the skills piece comes in, Sue, I think, because when we come in from that skills first approach, it's centered around the employers. It's centered around workforce and saying, what skills does somebody need? How do we get them in the door? Then how do we train them to stay? And then recognize that not everybody's going to stay. People are not going to stay in their job for 20 years anymore. That's not the reality of our workforce. And so helping employers understand the value in also investing in their employees, whether that's in higher education, if they're going on a track that really requires that in their role, or it's letting them go out and get a short-term credential or on-the-job training, and then allowing the individual to be able to articulate that in a way that can be recognized by others. And also, again, pulling everybody in around the table. We've got, not as much as I don't want to be let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but it's true. You have to have these cross-functional partnerships coming together to do this. And with the military now as well, we're shifting focus, right? It's very much, we're having a lot of conversations in our space about the lethality of the military. And so how can we ensure that credentialing and higher education also supports the lethality of the military? And so we've been having that because we don't want to see credentialing assistants go away. We don't want to see tuition assistants go away. We don't want to see, and I don't know that those things will ever happen, but we've seen them get shut down, right? We've seen those things get halted, and I'm right now with the government shutdown as well. And so it's really important to be able to, again, reframe how we speak about these things, ensuring that we're, again, being intentional, because I think everybody's said that word at least once now, I believe, right? We have to be intentional. We've got to be listening to each other. We've got to be having these conversations, and we have to be able to connect it to what's going on in our society, in our ecosystem at that moment in time, recognizing that it is a moment in time, and nothing we do can be a one-size-fits-all model. It has to be able to support the individual. So Allegra is speaking to that, of saying 2 people going through the same program, same training in the military, are going to have very different lived experiences. They might have different roles that they served during their military experience, where they've gained skills and knowledge they want to bring to the table. It's so nuanced. And I think whenever we try to put people in boxes, that's when we really do a disservice to the individual, but also to the institution itself. because we can gain so much from those people too when they're on our campuses, right?
If I might respond to that, Jesse, I think one thing that what you're saying there, Lauren, brings up to me is the motivation. And so I think where sort of a sit outside the fray sort of approach is needed is that employers are motivated by time and money too for themselves mostly. Like they have very little reason to have a vested interest in an individual employee's ability to go work somewhere else, basically, right? So little motivation for them to jump in. There's little motivation on the institution's parts to take the approach that you're talking about because it can be expensive. It requires a lot of dialogue. And ultimately, giving away credit costs an institution money, right? They're not collecting as much tuition. So who's motivated in this conversation to really deliver on behalf of the individual? And that's, I think, what causes the fatigue of it all is that even then within your institution, when you find it, it might be as simple as soon as that person who was really motivated to do it leaves, it's all over.
I was going to say, Lauren, one of the things that you were saying, and I think it's really interesting, the role that credit for prior learning can play in creating an opportunity for higher education to have a sanity check against workforce needs is this scenario that happens all the time where it's like, okay, so the university, we designed a program to help people get this job, okay? And then we have a military service member who has a related job and they have related training. So then we take the ACE recommendations and we go to the faculty and we say, great news. We want to help people get this job through this degree. And they have the learning for this introductory course in our program that we designed to get them there. And they say, well, they don't have that learning. It's not a perfect match. And they're right. It's not a perfect match, but it's kind of this conversation about like, well, what was the purpose of taking that class, right? Like Sue's saying, you got to peel back the layers a little bit. Why were they going to take that introduction to human resources class? Well, it was so that they could advance in their understanding and become a human resources practitioner. Well, if this individual from the military has already been operating as a human resources practitioner in the U.S. Army, okay, so maybe they don't have that line item, but I think credit for prior learning creates this really unique vantage point for the conversation to happen, that sanity check. Okay, yeah, acknowledged. I don't see an ACE recommendation that exactly matches the outcomes of the course that we are telling this student to take. But do they have to take that class? Is a different and related question that I think advances the topic a little further in the minds of faculty who are, they're doing their job. They're helping us find these alignments. But a perfect alignment is not necessarily the thing that we're looking for here. We're looking for why did they need those learning outcomes in the first place? And so we've actually found that using credit for prior learning has been a great way for us to even examine the purpose and the delivery of our own programs to say, wow, okay, maybe we need a little bit of flexibility here. And we're really lucky at Purdue Global that our faculty are really open-minded because we can create things like, and I think, Sue, we would giggle about the amount of architecture it takes to accomplish these tiny, easy, what should be an easy task, right? So maybe we can create a waiver opportunity where the student won't have to take the Intro to Human Resources class. And then we can create an elective for them to receive their military credit. And so we have all these mechanisms. But at the end of the day, I think a really interesting thing about military credit for prior learning is that it asks the question, why can't they get credit for this? And those conversations, I think, are really, really valuable to institutions, and everyone should really be having those conversations. I think, Sue, you said earlier, let's expect the credit and let's have a reason if it's not there, instead of let's start with nothing and build it up. Like let's start from it's all coming in, and let's do our research and be respectful and be rigorous, but let's do our research on why it might not count. And that's a great way, I think, to tie in Lauren's perspective of like, what's the purpose of the whole system? Purpose of the whole system is to get them where they want to go professionally. And so I think that's really important.
I don't want us to lose sight also of the fact that, let's not put, somebody said it earlier about putting people in a box. We have to remind ourselves that, and someone talked earlier about an infantryman. I mean, the reality of the matter is today's military healthcare person may want to be tomorrow's cyber person or vice versa. And so I just think we have to really think also about understanding the learning. Oh, you're a hospital corpsman today. Well, here's all this set credit. Wait a minute, I wasn't done talking. I'd like to be a cyber person tomorrow. And so how do we strike a balance between all the stuff that they learned as corpsman or whatever their MOS may be, but recognizing that folks want to do other things in their next chapter or whatever it may be. So I think that's one of the other pieces about this entire conversation is reskilling is a real thing. I mean, people want to go try new things and explore new avenues in life. And I think that the CPL piece also has to be agile to that.
Sounds like one of the biggest obstacles to CPL is this notion of quality. Everybody thinks that they have the corner on quality, or at least want to create a moat of quality around them. And even when we think about, this disconnect that we hear, I think, Lauren, what you were talking about is like employers are saying, I can't find anybody with these skills. And people are saying, I can't find any jobs. But yet when we get them in the room together, they're like, where have you been all my life, right? And it's like there's not only a semantics issue, but this notion of like, I cannot do what Kelvin is saying, which is like, possibly believe that somebody who was in the military corps or in the medical corps could possibly be in cybersecurity. Like that is just impossible. That they're in, and I guess I'm just really curious about how you guys thread the needle on this notion of quality.
I think, and I'm confident my colleagues on the call are going to have perspective on this too. So that's always the premise, Kelvin, for the work that we're doing is like, we know that 2/3 of individuals in the military as they separate are probably not going to want to do exactly what they did in the military. I have two belief systems that my personal belief. One personal belief that I have is that, well, historically, we haven't done a great job of translating that and showing them the possibility, like the possible pathways from their military occupation into occupations outside, right? I think like that we have not done a great job of that. I think people make a lot of assumptions that service members are getting all this coaching and mentoring while they're in service, and real like the reality sets in that they need guidance, they need support, they need tools, as Allegra said, a toolbox of tools to figure these things out. So that's one thing I do believe that's maybe why you see 2/3. There's also burnout. There's also, I didn't really want to do that job in the first place. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the things that we've really started to hone in on is with the skills piece is not making it a one size fits all. So when we do our analysis for manufacturing, right? So we have manufacturing, leadership, logistics. Let's look at leadership. We all know, or it's assumed, right, in society broadly, that individuals coming out of the military have leadership skills. We don't know how to pinpoint that. We don't know necessarily what that means. We just know that they have leadership skills and a different proficiency of leadership skills and different types of leadership skills. And so when you can define what types of leadership skills are out there, and then you can tie them back to points in time, training, different things, right, that might be available for analysis, so their military training, and say, what we found is any person in the Army at E2 and above that went through this training has these skills, right? We're not telling you they're applied. We're not telling you foundationally, they have these skills, right? Manufacturing logistics, same thing. We're crosswalking all these occupations to skills in manufacturing, to skills in logistics. So it opens the aperture, it opens the mindset to like, okay, there are lots of opportunities out there that I can take the skills I have and translate them into. And I think it's the same thing with credit for prior learning, right? It's very similar. It's just coming at it from a different angle where you're saying to them, okay, here's the learning that you have. We know that ACE has made some credit recommendations for it, but we know as an institution that if they did this over here, maybe they can also crosswalk into these types of opportunities, these degree programs. And so it's like helping them see it's not a one size fits all model in that as well. And then to quality, I don't know that we're ever going to get to a place where we have like one common definition of quality. I think we try really hard. I think there's quality indicators, there's quality criteria. Allegra's point, like I don't know that you have to meet every single one of those to be considered quality. So I'm using what you kind of talked about, Allegra, with like crosswalking learning outcomes, right? Do you need to have all 10 of those, or were 9 sufficient to say you could bypass that course? It's the same thing with quality. And so quality is super important, but we also can't assess every bit of learning that somebody has. And I think we need to work from the assumption that if individuals are in the military, and it's the Department of Defense, Department of War is the largest training and education provider in the world. They're the largest employer in the United States. And these are individuals that are being trained in their role consistently. And as they move up, are getting other types of skills that they're training to, right? We need to kind of work from, again, that strengths-based perspective of like, they're getting high quality training in the military. Let them show us otherwise, right? Like and if we find a situation where we do award credit or we recognize learning and someone is starting to struggle in that pathway, that's when you start to have conversations around, okay, there's gaps here. And how do we help you fill those gaps? And so I think that was a roundabout way of coming at it from quality, but I think quality is it's like a big idea. And we don't necessarily have one definition for it. So we've got to make sure that we take the bits and pieces of quality that fit the scenarios that we're in and make sure that we're being true to that, even if it doesn't look the same everywhere you go.
Great points. It's a really, really hard thing to thread with all these different populations, especially when the person that is coming to the table looking at all these different institutions and all these ads that say, we value you because you were in the military. And like, how do they differentiate for where to go and what that actually means and how institutions are attacking it? Because quality is also for that military person to assess which institution will value them. But the burden of credit for prior learning or recognition of learning generally is very high. Right? Most people don't have on their website like, hey, these are all of our MOSs we've already had evaluated, and this is what we're going to give you for credit. All right, which would be super transparent. But Sue, it looks like you have a deep thought.
Well, it's just interesting because I do feel like quality is like code. Quality's code for I can't come with any other reason to tell you no. I don't know. I feel like everything goes to culture always, and like what kind of culture are you creating? And is it a culture where you want to use those kinds of codes to get in the way of stuff or where you don't? And so like quality is like one of those words that just it like tells me I need another conversation because it's a fallback, which basically says whatever I do has more quality than whatever somebody else did. And therefore, I'm going to make that my case rather than really having to negotiate or have a dialogue with you about this thing. And everybody gets so afraid of the quality conversation that then they back off, right? Because quality. Yeah. And I don't know. I would just say to administrators out there, when somebody tells you it's about quality, it's code for something else, and dig deeper.
I don't like when they say, well, the accreditors say. But I feel like we've done a really good job over the last 2 years of being able to get the accreditors to say, oh, no, we fully support whatever you just have to do what you say you're going to do, right? The accreditors are not a blocker.
There are some exceptions to that, Jesse, especially in the discipline accreditors, where I think they get overly intrusive in telling you how you're going to do a thing and focusing on inputs instead of outcomes. And those are accreditors I'd like to have more meaningful conversations with too, because I feel like they're doing the thing that I'm trying to not do.
That's a great distinction, Sue. Regional accreditors, discipline accreditors. So many people to judge all of us.
Yes. Well, you mentioned something else there, Jesse, that I think is worth talking about too, because I do think some of it also goes to pointing to outcomes that maybe are overly focused on a singular kind of success and not broad success. And so, I'll point to some things like first time pass rates on tests as an outcome. And okay, how many people in a room of 100 raise their hand to say, I'm great at tests? Right? And yet there are plenty of accreditors who hinge their outcomes on first time pass rates. Some people need to see a test, like real time, feel the pressure, and get more comfortable, and being unrealistic about those kinds of things, I think also leads to inequitable situations. And, I want to be the university that takes a chance on people. Like when you talk about outcomes like this and targets of 70 or 80 or 90%, the natural reaction to those things is to limit your population to make sure you're going to get that outcome as an institution. So again, it goes to motivation and that would be quality, right? Okay. Well, it's only quality for the people who you let in then. But I had this great conversation with a fellow vice president at the community college one time when I was about to do something really bad. And he said to me, you're overly focused on the 7 who don't make it. I was in the 3 who did, and you would be telling me that I wouldn't get a chance. So what's wrong with a 30% success rate? Because I'm in the 30%. Okay. I've changed my thinking since that moment. The guy was a vice president at a community college at this point, who I basically would have said, you can't get into my community college associate's degree program, so too bad, so sad. Forget about it. Like, that's not quality.
Take a moment and observe all that. It's a lot. It's very, very personal for everyone involved. However, being with you guys, time is always flying. And so we need to wrap it up, unfortunately. So I'm going to work and try to get us a weekly TV show so that people can come and just see us riff on a particular topic every week. I don't know that it will be paid though, so just bear with me. At any rate, so when you think about this idea that we still have a pretty big mountain to climb to get this, to thread this needle. Maybe just a quick round robin of where you think that focus has to be. What is the one thing that actually is actionable that we could do that would contribute to moving the ball up the mountain?
I'll jump in first. I've actually been thinking about this as the last couple of minutes of conversation. I think that myth busting people's incorrect perceptions of what military CPL is and does is really important, because I think that there are a lot of leaders, administrators, and faculty who say, no, as Sue said, no, quality, compliance, regulatory, and they are not doing that, I think, for malicious reasons. I think they really feel like there is a reason they ought not to be doing this. I think we have to push back on that with research, with evidence. I mean, there's a lot of research happening out there that shows objectively credit for prior learning is great. And it actually is good for institutions too. And so I think if we can counter some of that misperception with kind of course correction, this is actually what it does. And then, unfortunately, for those in this advocacy kind of vein, I think I don't want to say don't take no for an answer, because sometimes you actually have to just live with no. But I think be really sure that you are pushing the right amount to challenge people, because they might be telling you no, and there might be nothing on the other side of that no. And you've got to be really sure, because I think that many more institutions and many more leaders could be practitioners in this space if someone would just let them. And we need those people to be doing that work.
I can jump in and build on a little bit of what Allegra shared. So I love the idea that, yes, we need to push on it, but sometimes no is just going to be no, or no in that moment, and not to give up on continuing to ask those questions, because knowledge is power, advocacy is power, relationship building is power. And so it's how do I go out into the institution and build relationships? One of the things I did a million years ago now, it feels like, when I was a director of military and veteran services, is I asked to be a part of like new faculty orientation. And I did a 30-minute presentation or 50, I forget what, I think they told me 30 and they ended up giving me 15. So that was fun, right? At the last second to try to scale back. And I had 15 minutes to essentially present to faculty the value the military connected population brings to campus, why credit for prior learning is so important, why recognizing what they've done in the military as it relates to their new pathway at our institution, like what the value of that was. And it was as simple as actually we passed around a survey and just asked folks if they felt comfortable self-disclosing if they themselves served in the military or had a close relative or a friend or a relationship to someone who did. And what we did was we kind of found out like who then inside of the faculty, new faculty hires, were going to be helping to advocate with us because they had a commitment to this too. They saw the value to it. And so one practical thing, I guess, if you're not doing that is try to get in front of people. So if you really believe in what you're doing on your campus and you want to make change, try to get in front of people that can help advocate with you, and also just recognize when it's not the right time, and maybe when to come back to that conversation. And at the end of the day, we're going to always find ourselves with, there are just going to be certain institutions that aren't going to change. And maybe they don't have to. Maybe that's okay for them. And if there are service members as they separate or veterans that want to go to those institutions, that's a hard conversation to have. But you're going to start from scratch, and maybe that's okay too, right? If maybe it's completely different than the path you took in the military, and you can take that high quality training you received and experience that you've had and apply it in the classroom towards your new opportunities too. And I think there's just an element of that it helps to just be honest with ourselves about too. So hopefully that there's some tangible things there that people can take.
I'll go ahead and jump in. All of that definitely resonates with me. And I think that it's probably pretty obvious. I hate no. So finding people who hate no is also, I go along with all of that. But, I do think that sometimes for folks who've been working in what I'll call non-traditional spaces, the community college environment, the online learning environment, I think we forget that we are the innovation sometimes because we're kind of mainstream now. I mean, community colleges were a huge innovation to meet a need that, the rest of the education system wasn't filling. And so was online education. And I think we're at an advantage in some ways, but what we haven't done very well is take our transparency external. And I will say, I feel like the new Carnegie classifications are a huge unlock for both of these spaces in the online learning and the community college space, where the measure of quality is different now. It's not about research. It's about the outcomes of your students. And I think there's an advocacy story here, which is not about inputs, but about outcomes. And that relates to actual students, like people, right? Like take the story of the people individually and in aggregate and use it to be sure that people understand the role that we play. The regulators, I mean, we're always the first they come after, whether it's community colleges and the university system doesn't want their credit, or it's is online learning as good as on-ground learning, all of those things. But we are filling a place. And I think we need to take that research you talked about, Allegra, and not just use it internally, but use it externally to show what we're doing and to change our place, because we are doing something. We did something for me. I wouldn't be here. and there are growing millions of people for whom that is a story. And we need to amplify that and change the place, because that's how we really change, the whole system. And maybe we can end this negative higher education narrative by showing that it doesn't have to be everybody, but it should be somebody who's doing this.
Kelvin, what do you think?
Yeah, no, everything's been said, and it's really encouraging to be in this conversation with experts. I think to Sue's point, and again, to everyone's point, it's we need to share more. We need to have this conversation. We need to be more transparent. When we reflect on those 200,000, folks that are going to become veterans every year, they're going to do a couple things. They're going to stay where the military dropped them off. They're going to go where opportunity takes them, or they're going to go back to the communities that they joined the military from. And I think about maybe some of those rural communities or those areas where maybe it's a regional college or a community college where they have not thought deep enough about how to serve those people that are returning to their community. So I think this notion of transparency and sharing research and sharing best practices is the only way that we're going to truly get after this in an intentional manner, going back to the beginning of the conversation, because I do think about those folks that are going back to, Oklahoma, Kansas, wherever. And maybe those schools that may have an opportunity to serve those military affiliated learners or return to those communities may be disadvantaged because they have not embraced the opportunity that is to think a little deeper about prior learning and find a more intentional and meaningful way to serve them. So we have to continue this element of transparency and sharing best practices. And to your point, Jesse, let's launch that weekly TV show or whatever. We'll do a pro bono because I think we're all in it for mission. We have to drive this conversation forward. Otherwise, it'll just be Purdue Global and Walden and Solid, and a few others, right? And we also have to, I guess the last thing I would say is in all of this, we also have to take a step back and not forget about the learner. What's motivating them to want to come back? And how do we best help them achieve that goal? And it may not be us, it may be another school, or maybe it's not now that they want a full associate's or a bachelor's degree, but maybe they just want some credentialing. And Lauren talked about that. How do we, and maybe this will be phase 2 of the conversation, where are we at on stackability? Where are we at that we can serve them today, but let them know that they have a pathway? Maybe they go into the workforce and now they want to come back a few years later and say, hey, I had this military training. I have this one credential that was just in time learning, so to speak. And now I want to stack that and continue my studies. So all that to say, I agree with everything that's been said over the course of this conversation. Really brilliant folks on here.
This for sure. Brilliance was here today. So, I do think it's important to just kind of close with this whole idea that higher education broadly has always said that accessibility, completion, and affordability is core to our mission, and everything that we do. And it seems to me that credit for prior learning is one of the only well-documented research areas and initiatives that actually meet all 3 of those outcomes to the benefit of the individuals, the institutions, and the workforce. And so I can't think of a stronger initiative to get right and get embedded, especially for our military families. So thank you all for spending some time with me today. And I'll be working on our TV show and trying to get it on the air. But such an important conversation. I hope we can continue it in short order and keep pushing. So thank you for everything that you do, and we'll talk soon.